We live in a truly unprecedented time in selling for so many reasons. But one of the biggest reasons is because we finally have so much really good science and data out there that actually tells us what is working and what isn't working. I can't emphasize how important this is because basically up until just a couple of years ago, most sales training and sales ideas were basically some guru's ideas of what worked, and they could only anecdotally tell if it was actually working or not. But now we live in a time where we know truly what works. So in this video, I'm going to show you the 7 killer sales techniques backed by science and data. Check it out. Number 1, the whiteboard pitch. Now, some recent data from Steve Martin tells us that only 31% of salespeople converse effectively with senior executives. And the whiteboard pitch solves this challenge. Put yourself in the shoes of a senior executive. Think of how many salespeople are hounding you every single day. And they're typically starting with one of two ways of trying to engage in the conversation. One is to open up their jacket pocket and talk about all the amazing things that are in their product or service. Or two is to open up with something really weak, like, I'd love to learn more about your business and understand what's keeping you up at night. And both of those approaches are deeply problematic with senior executives. That's not how they want to be engaged. Senior executives want insight. They want to engage with people who are going to demonstrate that they know what they are really talking about. We teach a concept called the whiteboard pitch, which is simply that you, at the beginning of an interaction with a senior executive, can demonstrate that you understand some of the key challenges that they're likely facing, and can actually share that on a quick whiteboard or on the back of an envelope or on a Zoom screen share, but making sure that you can really demonstrate that you know what's going on in their world and that you can back up those ideas with either your own data or data that supports those ideas. Number 2, disqualify. This data actually comes from the Sales Insights Lab, which shows that the majority of salespeople find that around only 50% or fewer of their initial prospects turn out to be a fit. So basically what this means is that 50% of people that you're going to come into contact with are really not likely to be a good fit for what you offer. And so what you want to do is use an approach that is early on in the sales conversation, weeding out the 50% that are not a good fit. And you want to isolate them and move on and never think about them again. There are so many reasons that a prospect might not be a good fit today for what you offer. You want to use a systematic set of questions to really determine whether someone's a fit. And if they're not, move on. If they are, that's the only time that you would take it to a next step. Number 3, be next step obsessed. Some recent data from Gong tells us that close rates actually decline by about 71% when next steps aren't discussed on the first call. If there has ever been a stronger piece of data to support the fact that we need to be always scheduling next steps in every interaction with a prospect, I don't know what's going to persuade us. We must be constantly focused on scheduling that next step when we're in front of a prospect. So many salespeople come up to me and say, I tried to follow up with this prospect and they never got back to me, or they never answered the phone. And I always say, well, why the hell are you following up in the first place? You always want to have a scheduled next step with a prospect at every stage of the sale. And so top reps are consistently taking time, particularly at the end of any prospect engagement, to always schedule a next step. That means a calendar invite goes out from you and goes into their calendar, and they hopefully accept it. Number 4, a quick two-way conversation. So another awesome piece of data from Gong tells us that top producers don't dilute their message. They spend about 39% less time pitching product features. And so what this tells us is really two things. One is that their presentations are actually shorter. they're physically shorter presentations. So they're spending less time of the sales process actually pitching or presenting their offering. And two is that it's not just a one-way monologue. They're not just throwing up all of their information all over the prospects. Instead, they're engaging their prospects in two-way conversations. In fact, other data shows us that top performers are having much more two-way conversation back and forth to ensure that the prospect is really engaged. So you want your prospects, during particularly the presentation phase, to be asking you lots of questions. That shows that they're actually engaged, and that is where we want to be when we're actually in that presentation. Number 5, slow down objections. Another great piece of data from Steve Martin tells us that 2/3 of buyers avoid revealing the truth about their intent to salespeople. And so what this means is that when prospects hit us with objections, very rarely are those objections the actual concern that they have. So you want to think of it almost as an iceberg. And at the tip of the iceberg is the initial objection that they throw at us. And so what we want to do, though, is get below the surface to understand what's really going on. And that's why we always want to slow down objections. That means don't immediately respond to an objection with some way to overcome it, but instead to dig in, understand what's going on, understand why they mentioned that objection in the first place. That is what top performers are doing on a consistent basis. And as a result, they ultimately deal with the real issue that the prospect is facing, thus significantly increasing the likelihood of actually closing that sale. Number 6, use a prospecting campaign blueprint. Now, some incredible data from TOPO tells us that it takes an average of 18 calls to actually connect with a buyer, and only 24% of sales emails are actually even opened. So what this tells us is that most salespeople who send a couple of emails or make 1 or 2 calls to a prospect are giving up way too early. And that's why we always suggest that salespeople use a prospecting campaign blueprint. That means mapping out your entire prospecting process that you're going to take each prospect through. So it almost becomes like a factory line where it's going to be consisting of different steps. So maybe that first step is that you send an email. Then the next step is that you follow up with a phone call, and then you leave a voicemail, and then you send a LinkedIn connection request, and then you send another email, and then you make another call, and then you send them a package, and then you make another call, right? So you map the whole process out. That's what a prospecting campaign blueprint is all about. This shouldn't be haphazard, this should be structured, but it should also have a lot of steps, because ultimately prospects often aren't responding to you because they don't want or need what you have. It's simply that they're super busy and they've got a lot going on. And so ultimately you've got to get the right message in front of the right prospect at the right time. Number 7, challenge your fears. Some incredible scientific data from Emory University tells us that we are born with only 2 innate fears, and that is the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. And so every time you have fear as a result of something to do with sales, you need to challenge that fear, because that is not a real fear that you were born with. Instead, that is some type of a fear that you have learned over the course of your life. And so we need to remember that when we're afraid to pick up that phone and make that dial, or we're afraid to ask that last question that we know we should be asking, or we're afraid to ask about that budget, or whatever it is, we need to recognize that we were not born inherently with the fears that would lead us to be weaker in a sales situation. We should always be challenging our fears and pushing through. That is what separates the average rep from the top rep, is the recognition that they can push through those fears and that discomfort. So there are the 7 killer sales techniques backed by science and data. And if you enjoyed this video, then I have an awesome free training on the data-driven approach to closing more sales in today's marketplace. Just click right here to get registered instantly. Seriously, just click right here. This is an in-depth training that will help you close more sales at higher prices, all while generating more meetings. Also, if you got some value, please like this video below on YouTube and be sure to subscribe to my channel by clicking my face that should be right about here to get access to a new video just like this one each week.